Today's class is going to be about the world to come. On purpose, I'm not explaining what this is because the purpose of the class is to explain what this is and to give a perspective at least, though not the only one. I have to be honest, on regards of Bnei Noach, whether Bnei Noach have this thing, whatever it is, world to come, they don't have it, etc. So let's start. First of all, we have to understand what are we talking about? When we say world to come, what does that mean? What does that mean? And there's not just one explanation of what this means. There are basically two. So that's why I'm saying, even though you know how to read, some parts of it I'll read because I think it's important to explain properly. So first of all, what does it mean, world to come? In Hebrew, you say olam haba, olam haba, which actually translates as world to come. But basically, there are two stages that will come, so to speak. The first one is a person lives, like the Psalm says, 70 years, 80 years, like the Torah says, 120 years, and okay, we pass away. That's part of what the human condition that we all have. Actually, interestingly, there are a few guys that only passed away because there is such a thing as death in the world. Otherwise, they wouldn't pass away at all. One of them was Ishai, the father of David HaMelech, Binyamin, the son of Yaakov. Okay, so there were certain very, very holy people. But the point is that we all pass away. That's the truth. So there's a world to come that comes exactly after this one because you pass away and you go to a different world, whatever that means. Gan Eden, that's the name it's given in the scriptures, in the Torah itself, not in the 5 books because it doesn't appear. That's why we're going to talk about this in a minute. But Gan Eden, basically the paradise, that's what it means. After this life, this physical life, you go to this particular place. And it is also called world to come, definitely. And the second type, so to speak, of world to come is the final state of creation, as we're going to learn in a few minutes. Final state of creation, that's a world that will come after this particular world. I mean, after we refined everything, we refined ourselves, we refined the world around us, Mashiach came, whatever Mashiach means, it's not a class about Mashiach, whatever that is, after Mashiach, really, after him, there's going to be resurrection of the dead, as we're going to learn later. And that's going to be the world to come, like eternal life in that state of world to come. These are the two ideas that usually we refer to when we say world to come. Independently of which one is the quote unquote real world to come, we'll learn that, patience. There's a famous question, right? Really famous question, and so many great rabbis deal with this question. Why is it not mentioned in the Torah? None of them. In the 5 books of Moshe, not the Gan Eden is mentioned, and not the resurrection of the dead is mentioned. So, obvious question is why? If we know that this is one of the foundations of Torah, of Judaism, etc., the resurrection of the dead, etc., that there's a reward, spiritual reward. Why is it not mentioned? So there are several answers given to this question. I just quoted 3 of the most famous answers. Point number 1, the Torah talks, just to give you an idea, I put the source over there because it's very interesting. Abarbanel, Don Itzhak Abarbanel, he lived in Spain, 1492. Actually, he was one of the ones that were expelled from Spain. He was actually the minister of economics of the kings. And they told him, you can stay. It's fine. You can stay. It's okay with you. And he said, no. If my brothers are all leaving because they were expelled, I'm leaving also. Bye-bye. So he left. It was a huge, he wrote so much and he writes so long. So he wrote 7 answers to this question. This particular question, he wrote 7 different answers. One of them is that the Torah is talking about most of the people, like regular, many people. I don't know how it works in Europe or United States, whatever. In Argentina, when you go to a soccer game, don't ask how I know this, doesn't matter. When you go over there are basically 2 places you can go. There are more, but whatever, basically 2 places. Either you go to something that is called in Spanish popular. Popular means popular, The poor people go over there, they just stand over there, there's no seats, no nothing, just stand over there and watch the game. Or you can go to something that is called platea. Platea is like a VIP place. You have a seat and you watch the game and everything is okay. So basically, the truth is that most of the people don't go to the VIP section because it's expensive, You go to the popular place and you just watch the game. Same thing happens in general in the human being. Most of the people are not very knowledgeable and sages, etc. Most of the people are really simple people. So when the Torah talks to these people, the Torah can't say like complex things and abstract things. Forget it. Just tell the guy, if you behave nice, you will have rain. Oh, I get that message. I got it. I behave nice, I have rain, so I have money because, crop grows, etc., etc. You can't tell this simple person, if you behave nice, after 70 years, you will have something. What? I don't get it. I need rain. So that's why the Torah says in this way, talks in this way. That's one answer. Another answer, the Rambam gives this, and the Abarbanel also quotes this answer. It's impossible to understand what it means, Gan Eden, paradise. It's impossible. Forget it. The human mind cannot get it. Why not? What's the problem? Are we not smart? And the answer is very simple and interesting and simple. We are humans, we know that, but we are tied to physical world. And we understand things, even in the most elevated levels of understanding, it doesn't matter. The understanding is tied to a physical world, to a physical brain understanding things. And here, Gan Eden, paradise, whatever that means, I don't know either, is not something physical. It's something spiritual, something completely abstract. And we cannot understand it. Another example that is given on this, it appears in the works of Hasidus, in Kabbalah, etc., that pleasure is something we can relate to. Whatever, each person has his own level or type of pleasure, doesn't really matter. This one likes eating, this one likes drinking, or whatever, it doesn't matter. But we can understand pleasure. And pleasure usually in a human being works in spaces of time. Like how much pleasure can you have really extending this pleasure in time? It's very difficult. You drink something, suppose somebody likes drinking. So, okay, he drinks. He has pleasure of drinking. What, he's drinking more. And you more. There's a time that you don't have any more pleasure on drinking. That's it. Enough. You cannot even enjoy it because you're drunk or whatever. So that kind of pleasure for a specific amount of time, we can understand it and grasp it and say, yeah, this is a pleasurable thing. But Gan Eden is a constant pleasure, non-stop. All the time, whatever they do, understanding God or learning Torah, I don't care. Whatever they do, it's constant. And there's a rule, and this is the interesting part of it, at least to me, constant pleasure is not called pleasure. It lost the quality of pleasure. That's it. Because it's a given. Like, suppose a person has difficulties on breathing. It's a terrible thing because you can pass away. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. So at the moment that he actually can breathe, it's a pleasure. But we, like regular people, not sick people, etc., we breathe and we don't have pleasure by breathing. Just breathe. It's a normal thing because it's a constant thing. You don't have pleasure on constant things. So Gan Eden is a constant pleasure of godliness. So automatically, we cannot get it. It's impossible for us to understand what it means. That's why the Torah doesn't say this. That's what the Rambam writes. And there's another very interesting source, and it's in different sources, but this is maybe one of the first ones. The objective of life, why did God create man in the earth and put it and gave him hair, whatever, commandments and everything, etc., is to be in this world and attached to God in this world. Don't leave this world like the monks that go to Nepal and they live over there in the mountains and they get away from the world. No, that's not the objective. Judaism is a very, very down-to-earth thing. You should be serving God and attaching yourself to Him down here in physical world. That's why the Torah doesn't mention any reward of spiritual things, because the biggest reward, what is it? To be in this world, physical world, and serve God. That's the biggest reward. So why should the Torah mention something, intermediate, not so important, when it could actually mention the most important thing, to be in this world, physical world, and serve God? That's why the Torah doesn't mention, at least a few ideas, this thing of Gan Eden, paradise, etc. Now, we do know that such a thing exists. It's in the prophets, there are many, many proofs about this concept, but maybe the simplest one is the Mishnah, Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers. It says over there that this world is actually just an entrance way to the world to come, whatever that means, world to come. We explain two things in world to come, as we will see in a minute. And our sages tell us, we don't know exactly why, how they know this, I don't know, there were prophets or whatever, that a single moment of spiritual bliss or enjoyment, pleasure in the world to come is even greater in all the pleasures you can ever have in this world. Even though it's a constant pleasure, and the rule is constant pleasure is not called pleasure. However, in that world, it is. So that's why we just don't get this thing. So just in summarizing, what are we talking about when we say world to come? Two ideas. Either the reward you get after this life, or either the final reward, the objective why God created this earth. Now, there's a famous discussion, which one of these two expressions of the world to come is really what our sages talk about. Maimonides and Nachmanides, there's a very famous argument on this. So we're going to read what the Rambam writes, Maimonides and then Nachmanides. They both live in Spain. Maimonides 150 years before Nachmanides, around 1100s. He writes like this: just as the blind can perceive colors, and the deaf cannot understand and perceive voices, in the same way the body cannot perceive the pleasures of the souls in the world to come. Whatever that means, we don't know yet. What's the opinion of the Rambam? It's a constant and eternal pleasure. The souls will understand God. After resurrection of the dead, everybody will die, and that's the world to come. This is what the Rambam writes. Clearly, everybody agrees that the Rambam is saying this. The Ramban disagrees with what he says, but this is what he says. In other words, how does the cycle, quote unquote, of life works according to the Rambam? We're alive, okay? I think I'm alive. We are alive, and then 70 years, 80 years, 120 years, whatever the case is, we pass away. And then we go to Gan Eden, to paradise. There's a previous stop in the purgatory, whatever that means, but then we go to paradise. Very nice. We will learn in a minute if it applies to Bnei Noach or not. Bear with me. Then there's the resurrection of the dead. This is what the Rambam writes. And everybody's going to be alive, and then everybody's going to die. That's it. Forget it. And life is going to be an eternal spiritual life. The Rambam calls it Sichlim Nivdalim. Seichel means intellect. Nivdal means separated. Separated intellects. That's what the Rambam calls it. Everybody's going to be like a separated intellect. I don't know where and how. Don't ask me. This is what the Rambam writes. So what's the final stage of existence according to the Rambam? Spiritual thing. Spiritual existence. Okay. The Ramban, talking about what the Rambam writes, he has a whole book called Shara Gmul, which means what's the final reward, etc. Whole book on this. At the end of the book, he writes about what the Rambam writes, Maimonides. And Nachmanides says like this: even though the Gan Eden is an amazing pleasure, really very nice, it's going to be temporary. Forget it. It's not the final thing. The final objective is the pleasure on God, on the resurrection itself. And that is the world to come. So we see that the argument over here is not whether there is a Gan Eden, a paradise or not, for the souls after death, after life, etc. Yeah, that everybody agrees. Everybody agrees. However, the question is, what's the final stage? Maimonides says final stage is a spiritual thing. Nachmanides says, no way. Final stage is a physical stage with a body and a soul as we know it, but in a more refined way, because it's going to be eternal life. Of course, everybody understands that the body gets, tired and wear away, whatever they worn out. I don't know how to say this. The body becomes old, and therefore we pass away. but we're going to relive, resurrect, and then the body is going to be, so to speak, perfect, and it's not going to be worn out or anything, and we're just going to live eternally. That's what the Ramban says. Who's right? Of course, who are we to say this one or this one? But the mystics, Hasidus, in many places, makes very clear that the mystical branch of Judaism goes with the Ramban, Nachmanides. He himself was a mystic also. There's a whole big, really big argument between the sages whether the Rambam, Maimonides, learned Kabbalah or not, he knew Zohar or not. Some of the laws that he brings, they're just found in the Zohar, so apparently he knew the Zohar. Okay, we don't really know, but the point is, certainly Ramban, Nachmanides, he writes it in his commentary to the Torah, he was a Mekubal, he was a Kabbalist, whatever that means in his times, and that's why the mystics who follow the path of Kabbalah, whatever, mysticism, they go according to the Ramban. So, what do we have now? Conclusion until now, and then we'll move on. We have afterlife. What does that mean, afterlife? First of all, after living 70, 80, 120 years, either you go to Gan Eden, paradise, and you enjoy God, or you go to Gehinnom, purgatory. I'm not going to expand on this. Forget it. You can find it in so many places. It's a terrible thing, terrible punishments for the soul, for the body. Okay, not so nice. There are books written on this. Okay. But it's just important thing to mention. There's no such a thing as hell in Judaism, because hell would mean a constant and eternal punishment just for the sake of punishment. You're going to be punished because you did this and that, so God, for some reason, I'm being ironic, sarcastic, of course, God cannot punish you in this life for whatever reason, so I'm going to punish you in the next life. You will see what I'll do to you. Okay, it's a stupid thing. So Judaism doesn't believe on this. Judaism believes on eternal, quote unquote, eternal goodness of God. Why do I mean quote unquote? Because Gan Eden is not an eternal thing. We just learned, I'm going back from the Ramban, it's a temporary thing. So whatever. We believe in goodness of God. But in order to be able to grasp this goodness, we all need some certain process of cleansing, whatever, cleaning the soul, cleaning the body. That's what purgatory means. A step before Gan Eden. Okay, then we have reincarnation. I did not talk about this at length, and I'm not going to do this either. It's a whole class in itself, but there is such a thing that can be seen in two ways. Either God is giving you an opportunity to move forward, advance more in your attachment and service to God, or as a punishment. How do you see this? Because if a person is megulgal, that's the word in Hebrew. Gilgulim means reincarnations. Gilgul means one reincarnation. So if a person is megulgal, reincarnates in a human being, that's good because you can actually accomplish something in the world. But suppose a person reincarnates in an ant, in a stone. What can you do? Not much. Can you actually serve God? Even though the whole creation serves God, there's a whole book text on this. It's called Perek Shira. But the truth is that serving God according to commandments is impossible. The ant does what it does because it's an ant. It was created that way. The stone, it was created as a stone. It doesn't change anyway. So at any time. So you can't really serve God. So being reincarnated in those creatures, whatever, it's really a punishment. It's not really something good. And then we have resurrection of the dead. That's what the Ramban says, and the mystic said, this is the world to come. That's what it means, and it's after the coming of Mashiach, an eternal life, body and soul. Okay, now we have to know about Bnei Noach. What about them? We understood now what we're talking about when we say world to come. World to come doesn't mean Gan Eden, the paradise. No. It means the end stage of creation. Actually, this was the original objective God had in his whole creation. Okay. So what about Bnei Noach? First of all, returning just a little bit to the Gan Eden to understand whether Bnei Noach have Gan Eden or not. Because, okay, we're going to discuss later whether they have the end point, etc. But what about Gan Eden? When a person passes away, 70, 80 years, 120 years. Does he go to Gan Eden or not? Does she go to Gan Eden or not? Of course, first point I should make very clear. I'm pretty sure, but I think nobody, no rabbi today can tell anyone, you are going to go to Gan Eden, you're not going to go to Gan Eden. Nobody can know that. And I know that people have questions, specifically speaking in difficult times when somebody passes away, etc. Is my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is he going to go to Gan Eden or not? Nobody can answer that question. At difficult times, we all say, yes, don't worry, it's going to be fine. It's just trying to bring some comfort in difficult times. I suppose you understand what I'm talking about. But nobody can really, say, yes, I'm sure. I don't know. Nobody knows. So, in general, I made that note, so to speak, because in general, we can say, yes, Bnei Noach have Gan Eden. Oh, if this guy really behaved so bad, okay, I don't know. That's up to God, not up to me. I'm not the one that's going to say, you go, you don't go. I don't know. That's the truth. But in general, we say yes. Why? Why am I so sure that in general, yes? I put a drawing over there of Ramad de Fano. He lived in Italy. The Menachem Azari de Fano. He writes, it's a whole thing about how many mitzvahs, commandments are for Bnei Noach. In one place, the Talmud says 7. In another place, the Talmud says 30. So the Ramad Efan is one of the first sources that actually quotes and explains what are the 30. In order to understand, look at the Ramad Efan lived, again, in Italy, 1500s, 1600s, whatever. Why do I say one of the first sources? Rashi, who lived like 400 years before the Ramad Efan, was a huge sage. In his commentary to the Talmud says there are 30 commandments for Bnei Noach. Rashi says, I don't know what these are. Rashi just says, okay, I don't know. That's it. I'm sorry. Can't help you. Ramad Efan comes 400 years later and says, okay, I'll give you a possibility. I'll list for you what they are. Oh, the sources over there, where they are. So we know, this is a known thing, that the reward for Torah learning, for learning Torah, what we're actually doing now, is the Gan Eden. Like, where do you get the reward of having learned in your life? And furthermore, what are you going to learn in Gan Eden? What you're learning right now. I mean, what you learned in your life during lifetime, that's what you're going to be learning in Gan Eden in a completely different level, in the level of Gan Eden. That's nice. But basically, the subjects and the ideas and the teachings, etc., that you learned now, that's what you're learning in Gan Eden. That's the reward you actually have. Having access to a very deeper level of learning of the same things you learned over here, you learned over there. The Talmud says, Ashrei mishibale kam Talmud v'yadei. Ashrei. Happy is the person that comes over here, that means Gan Eden, the paradise, and he has his Talmud, his learning in his hands. So you really got it. You really learned something. That's what you're learning in Gan Eden. Okay, so we tied, so to speak, Gan Eden with Torah. That's nice. Why do I say this? Because the Ramad Efan writes clearly that one of the commandments of these famous 30 commandments for Bnei Noach is learning Torah. For Bnei Noach, learning Torah. That means that God, quote unquote, he's not obligated on anything, but he promised whatever, he's going to give you a reward. So he has to give you a reward for the Torah you're learning. Where is he going to give you that reward? In the Gan Eden. And how do we know that actually it's an important thing for Bnei Noach and it's a positive thing to learn Torah? So we go to the Talmud. The Talmud brings a very interesting thing. Rabbi Meir used to say, how do you know, from what is derived, whatever, how do you know that even a Gentile who engages, and the word engages is an interesting word in the Torah, in the Talmud it says, oisek. It's a type of learning that means like really deep learning. It doesn't mean like reading. Yeah, open the book and read. No. Engaging means like really, we're learning. How do you know that this person is a Gentile and engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest, a very high level, like a high priest? We learn that from a verse. The verse says, "You shall therefore keep my statutes and my ordinances, which if a man does, he shall live by them." The Torah says man. Man means that not man and not woman. It means everything is the same, just a human being, whatever, man. And Rabbi Meir said the phrase, which if that doesn't say, I don't know, the translation is not so good over here. I copied from Safari, I'm sorry. Which priests, Levites, and Israelites do, they shall live by them. The verse doesn't say that a priest will have life with the Torah, that a Levite will have life with the Torah, that an Israelite, whatever, will have life with the Torah. No, it says man. Indicates mankind in general. Rabbi Meir says this very clear. You have therefore learned that even a Gentile who engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest. It's a very lofty thing and has a part, so to speak, in the mitzvah of limud haTorah, learning Torah. So therefore, will non-Jews have Gan Eden? Yeah. If you ask me what type of Gan Eden, what level is going to be, I have no idea. I'm sorry. I can't help you on this one. But certainly, just by looking at the different sources and just putting things together like a puzzle, Bnei Noach would have Gan Eden. Okay. So now let's go to the world to come, whatever that means. Here we have a few sources. Besides the idea of resurrection of the dead, bear with me. We have a few sources over here. First source is the Midrash, which is a very ancient, so to speak, source. We're talking about year 200 of Common Era, more or less. And the Midrash says very clear, in the future, God will inherit the world to come to the pious among the Gentiles, and they will be priests to God. The sources over there, Yalkut, Shimoin, etc. So it's very clear. They will have world to come. Maimonides, the Rambam, says basically the same idea. Pious among the nations will have world to come. Not to forget, important, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph. You can do that in his famous paragraph. Not to forget that when the Rambam talks about the world to come, it's talking about a very specific thing. Souls, whatever, intellect, divided, separated intellects floating around the air. Don't ask me where, how, I don't know. That's what the Rambam means when he talks about the world to come. This is his opinion. So when he's talking about non-Jews, basically he's saying the same. Non-Jews will have also this thing of world to come, the way the Rambam understands it. And of course, we can take this to apply it to the way we understand the world to come. Independently of how you get it, if it's a Gan Eden after 70 years, etc., or if it's the resurrection of the dead, we can say the same thing. The Midrash doesn't say exactly what it means to world to come. The Rambam has his explanation, okay, but we have a different one. What's the problem? So again, from the Midrash, you see clearly that the pious among the Gentiles will have the world to come. From the Rambam, you see clearly they will have the world to come. Third source, the Zohar. The sources over there, it's very interesting. The Zohar says clearly, I just translated it as it is. All Gentiles that do tshuva, whatever that means, repent, I don't know what that means, repent, the Zohar doesn't say what it means, and separate from idolatry and from transgressions, whatever that means. The Zohar doesn't say what it means, transgressions in this sense. If a person separates from that, God will put him in a holy, put in him a holy ruach and a holy nefesh. That means in life, like in physical life, right now, that means when a person is alive, will have a ruach, whatever that means, and a nefesh. It's two names for the soul. Does it mean that Bnei Noach don't have a neshama, a soul, a different name for the soul? I don't know. The truth is, I don't know. This is not such a simple thing, and you're not going to find too many sources talking about this. Actually, none, as far as I know. But whatever, this is what the Zohar says. The Zohar is a type of book that you take it or leave it. That's the way it is. So the Zohar says clearly, if a person during life, like in lifetime, behaves properly, does tshuva, separates from idolatry, etc., no transgressions, she has Ruach and a nefesh, holy, whatever that means. And therefore, because he has this ruach and this nefesh in life, has a portion in the world to come. Because when a person passes away, you have to put this ruach and nefesh somewhere. You're not going to destroy them. This is my explanation of the Zohar. It doesn't mean that it's right. It's just my way of understanding the Zohar. So what do you do with this ruach and nefesh that you put within this non-Jew? Where do they go? The guy passed away. What do you want? So he has to go to the world to come. And the Zohar continues, and don't ask me to explain this, but not with the Jews, rather a portion by itself and a world by itself. This is what the Zohar says. What does it mean? I have no idea. And as far as I know, nobody can explain this. I don't know. But this is what it means. So we see clearly, no doubt, that the non-Jews have a piece in the world to come. Definitely you can apply this to Gan Eden. And definitely you can apply this to the way the Rambam understands things. The question is, can you apply this to the resurrection of the dead? So it's not so simple. Let's move on to the next group of sources. The Tanakh, the Torah, the 24 books of the Torah, etc., Bible, whatever you want to call it, it brings very clearly that there is such a thing, nobody doubts, there is such a thing as a resurrection of the dead. Two different sources, I don't know why they remain too small, whatever, Yeshaya and Daniel, they talk about this. You can read it yourself, and it's clear, okay? Everybody is going to resurrect. Very nice. And we know also that Rambam writes it clearly in his introduction to the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, that one of the, when he's described in the 13 principles, foundations of Judaism, the Rambam writes clearly that the number 13, the last one, is resurrection of the dead. And he's interesting, he writes, when he wrote this commentary, he writes, this is something so obvious, I have nothing to explain. In the other 12, he explained the whole text on them, some more and some less. But in this one, he doesn't say anything. So he had a very, very big criticism on this by his colleagues and the people from his times, saying that the Rambam doesn't really believe on this. Because that's why he didn't write anything about it, because he doesn't believe in it. And the Rambam went out and wrote a whole letter, long letter on the resurrection of the dead. I do believe on this and whatever, but we don't know exactly how it's going to be. Now, that's about the Jews. What about Bnei Noach? So we have only, as far as I know, only one source that talks about this. And the source is in the Midrash. The Midrash says clearly, I'll read it, and it's clear and strong, resurrection of the dead is for Israel, for Jews, not for idolaters. That's what the words of the Midrash. Akum. Akum in Hebrew, it's an acronym actually. Oived Koichavim Mazales. A person that serves the stars and the constellations, etc. Idolater, typical pagan idolater. So the Midrash says clearly, not for Akum, idolaters. Now, before moving on, you can read it, but before moving on to the next source, which is a commentary on the Midrash, one small note that I think it's very important to make. We don't have, it's sad, but it's the truth. We don't have the exact, like precise and exact text of the Talmud, Midrashim, etc. We don't have them. Especially when they talk about non-Jews. When the Midrash or whatever the Talmud is talking about other subjects like laws and then the Torah and the Jews and the whatever mitzvahs and commandments for the Jews, basically that's quote unquote untouched by censorship. But when the Torah talks about non-Jews, oy vey, it's a problem. Nobody really knows what's the real text that Rav Ashi and Ravina, two great sages, year 400, the Common Era, around that year, they wrote the Talmud, manuscript, of course, ink and everything. There was no printing over there in that time. Nobody knows what they really wrote. Why not? Because, and you probably know this, year after year, century after century, etc., we had censorship of the church, and they didn't like so many things about what we wrote that our sages saw the necessity of changing certain words so the censorship would not be bothered by this. So if you write, and give you a very simple example, this Midrash Rabbah, we just read it in a different way. Resurrection of the dead is for Israel, that means for Jews, and not for non-Jews. Read it that way. Wow. Comes a censor, the guy that censors, I don't know how to say this, that works on censorship, and says, oh, these Jews say that I don't have resurrection of the dead. I don't like this. So I'm going to burn this book. That's it. Take it away. Either you take it away, you erase this, or burn it, etc., as happened so many times. So the sages said, okay, you know what? Just write idolaters, and you're going to be fine. Because the Christians, whatever, in whatever shape it is, whatever color you have it, they don't consider themselves idolaters. Not at all. Whether it is idolatry or not is a different subject, but they don't consider themselves idolaters. So if the text says it's for Jews, not for idolaters, okay, the text is not talking about us, move on. So we don't really know the real precise text on these subjects that talk about non-Jews. Having said that, let's move on to the next source. There's a commentary, there are many commentaries on the Midrash. Yefet Toyer is one of those commentaries. And he says, very clear, not only the Jews, wait a second, we're talking about resurrection of the dead. That doesn't apply only to Jews. It applies to the pious among the Gentiles. Also, they also have a portion in the world to come, and the resurrection of the dead. Look at the words. He says both things. World to come, resurrection of the dead. He could have just said resurrection of the dead. Why? Because the Midrash, that's what he's talking about. Like the subject is resurrection of the dead. And he says, no, world to come. Who's talking about this? Why do you mention this? Okay, there are many ways of understanding. Basically, you could say he wants to include the Rambam. Like, okay, just whatever the case is, Rambam, Ramban, as we learned before, just whatever, just put world to come, resurrection is going to be fine. Another way to understand this is as we learned before. World to come is talking about Gan Eden, paradise, reward for Torah learning, and resurrection of the dead is a different thing. It's a different story, so to speak, the end of the times, etc. And that would go according to the opinion of Ramban, Nachmanides. So this is for the presentation itself, but let's go to conclusions. Oops, over here. I didn't write it again because it's just writing the same thing again. So let's go back. Conclusions. We know that there is such a thing as a Gan Eden, a paradise. That's the reward for a person. I'm being precise, a person, not just Jew or non-Jew, a person for learning Torah. Of course, you can say, yeah, but the Jew learns in this and that. Okay. There is such a thing as a mitzvah for learning Torah for non-Jews also. The Ramah Defanos writes this, the Talmud alludes to this clearly. No doubt about it. I should point out, I didn't mention it before because just forgot, but I should point out that the Talmud doesn't finish over there. That's what Rabbi Meir says. The Talmud continues and says that this applies when the non-Jew learns about the 7 commandments that she has. Talmud says this clearly. You can look at the sources and you will find it. What does that mean? The Rebbe, when talking about, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, when talking about the 7 commandments and Noahide laws, or whatever you want to call them, in most of the cases, very seldom that he didn't mention it, he says the 7 commandments and all the ramifications, derivations, etc., derivatives, etc. So it's not just 7 things, and it's very clear if you read the text of the Talmud when it talks about this in Sanhedrin 56, 57, 58, 59, etc. Those pages talk about the laws of non-Jews, how the Jews look at the non-Jews, so to speak, and their laws. It's very clear over there that there are more than just 7 things. 7 things is the things you do not have to do. Don't do this. But there are more things, definitely. So that's Gan Eden. That's fine. Non-Jews also get this. We just saw world to come, resurrection, etc. Then you have Gehinnom. Of course, there's Gehinnom for Jews and for non-Jews also, no doubt about it. And I should mention, even though it's not the subject of the class, but I should also mention there is such a thing as completely destroy, physically and spiritually, completely destroy non-Jews that hurt the Jewish people throughout the ages. There is such a thing. There is such a source. It is known, no question about it. But this class is for Bnei Noach, like we're supposed to be good people. So why talk about that? Okay, let's move on. Reincarnation. Do Bnei Noach have reincarnation or not? Yes, definitely. Many sources talk about this. And just to mention one, even though I didn't put because it's not a class on reincarnation, but Shara Gilgulim, written by the portal of reincarnation, whatever. He was written by Chaim Vital. Rav Chaim Vital, it's Talmud, the main student of the Arizal. He writes over there all the laws and comes and goes and back and forth, what Gilgulim are, etc. So it's a big book. It's a complex book, definitely. But he writes over there that there were so many Gilgulim. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, for instance, was a Gilgul of Hevel. Hevel was not a Jew, I'm sorry. He was like second human being on earth or third, whatever. He wasn't a Jew. And like this, so many, Bilam and Balak and Nebuchadnezzar, so many non-Jews that are brought down in those books that had resurrection before the giving of the Torah and after the giving of the Torah. So no doubt about it, non-Jews also have resurrection. You could argue whether it's going to be in a shape of opportunity or punishment. That's a different story. You could argue that. Okay, granted. But certainly they have resurrection also. And then you have resurrection of the dead and the world to come, the way the mystics, Hasidus, etc., understands it. That's the end of the story, so to speak, after the days of Mashiach. And according to this commentary that I brought before, what is this? Okay, of Yefetoyer, the non-Jews also have a part on this. And certainly you could explain the Zohar in this particular source that I'm showing now, the last paragraph, also by saying the world to come means resurrection of the dead. Why? Very simple. If according to the mysticism, the world to come is a physical life, that's what it means when I say world to come, physical life and physical souls in this world, etc., in eternal life. So when the Zohar talks about the world to come, what is talking about? Not what the Rambam says. Because the Rambam has a different world, so to speak, world to come. The Zohar is talking about what the Zohar means, world to come, it's a resurrection of the dead. So certainly, you could also have this source talking about that. Why didn't I include it in the slide about the resurrection of the dead? Because the language, it's a different language. The language in Hebrew, resurrection of the dead, is Tchias Amesim. So in the sources that say clearly Tchias Amesim, we have this one in the Midrash. It's for the Jews, not for the idolaters, whatever the original text was, I don't know, but whatever. The commentary says clearly, pious amongst the nations have resurrection of the dead. That's why he says also Olam Haba is the other word. Is the word for the other concept, world to come, whatever that means. So in this source, the Midrash and the commentary of the Midrash Yefetoyer, it says clearly Tchias Amesim. In the source of the Zohar, in Zohar Chadash, Rus, etc., it doesn't say resurrection of the dead. It just says Olam Haba, world to come. So you could explain it in different ways. But basically, this is the idea of the world to come. What do people do in the world to come? Okay, we explained that in Gan Eden, basically we learn Torah. The Talmud says that the tzaddikim yoshvim nenim mizivashchina, the righteous people are seated over there, whatever that means. The Rambam says we don't sit, we don't stand, whatever, and enjoying the ray of the divine presence, whatever that means. And the Talmud says also, they have their crowns in their heads, which alludes to the learning of the Torah. So certainly we learn Torah over there in Gan Eden. And in the resurrection of the dead, what are we going to do for eternity? Sounds kind of boring, For eternity, you're going to be doing No, we're going to be grasping God. The Rambam says this very clear at the end of his book, talking about Mashiach. And there's a whole explanation that even the Rambam agrees that there's a separate stages in the coming of Mashiach, in the resurrection of the dead. Okay, besides the whole deepness about it, the lengthy deepness about it, besides that, the Rambam writes clearly, the occupation of the whole world, and the whole world means every single human being, is going to be grasping God, understanding God according to our capacities for eternal life. And if somebody asks, is it going to be boring? No. Why not? Because God is eternal. Therefore, us as human beings, even, of course, not today, I mean, in the resurrection of the dead, even perfect human beings, we're also going to be able to grasp more and more and more and more. And it's a known thing, like a rational thing, rational fact, that when a person understands something really new to him, to her, whatever, has pleasure on this, because it's something new. It's not something you understood so many times and so many years ago, and you learned this already. No. That's why I mean, constant pleasure is not pleasure. Yeah, right. But in the world to come, like resurrection of the dead, it's not going to be same constant pleasure. It's going to be changing all the time. Why? Because you're going to be higher and higher and higher in the understanding of the essence of God, which is eternal, which is infinite, and has no end. That's what it means, infinity. So therefore, our knowledge of Him also will have no end.